Hey everybody, welcome to Celebrate Recovery here at the Common Table Online. I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with my pride, my desire for perfection, compulsive behavior, daily battle with anxiety, and a pull towards depression. And my name is Zach. You're going to meet in a few moments the two national directors of Celebrate Recovery, Mac and Mary Owen. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're going to hear a tough story. You're going to hear a powerful testimony that is hard to listen to at times, but it is a story of encouragement and hope and the wonderful ways that we can be used by our higher power, Jesus Christ, if only we allow ourselves to be used. In Scripture, Jesus said, "To all those who have ears, let them hear." So I would challenge you, listen to what you're about to hear tonight and take something away from it. Maybe there's something that impacts you or that opens your eyes to how you can engage the people around you, your loved ones, the ones that are closest to you. Or maybe it's just a story of hope and encouragement that prompts you to take the next faithful step in your growth and recovery journey. But I challenge you to hear what is to be shared for us. Because Jesus also said in Scripture, the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Our higher power died on the cross for us so that we could have life. So no matter what life throws at us, we've been given new life and we have it abundantly. So I want to challenge you to listen to this powerful story. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mac and Mary.
Welcome, everybody. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and it was my struggles with drugs and alcohol that brought me to Celebrate Recovery. My name is Mac.
Hello, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ who has struggled with codependency for much of my life. My name is Mary.
For tonight's testimony, it happens to be my all-time favorite person. My sweet wife, Mary, is going to be giving her testimony. So I'm going to go sit back in the audience, and Mary, take it away.
All right. I'll scoot over here. I'm going to share a small part of our story tonight. If you would like to read the whole story of God's miraculous work in our life, you can read our book, Never Let Go. Never let go of hope because God has a plan. Okay, here we go, my story, part of our story. October 1951, my father woke up finding my mother sitting on the floor holding my baby brother. She had a haunting blank stare on her face. Little Johnny was crying while laying in her arms, and this went on for 2 days. Doctors said she needed to be admitted into the state hospital. Once there, the medical staff wouldn't tell my dad anything or let him visit her. It took several weeks to get a court order to see her. My dad found my mother in a tiny room crouched in a corner like a wild, caged animal. He brought her home and wondered if she would ever function in life again. Eventually, that mental state hospital was closed due to the barbaric treatment of those with mental health issues. My parents were young and hadn't been married long. They were full of love and life. Now my parents' battle with this unknown illness began. The term paranoid schizophrenic didn't mean anything to my father. He only knew the woman he loved was sick. He now had a family secret. Fast forward to 1974, I met Mac when we were 15 and 16 years old. I became pregnant after having sex the first time for both of us. At 5 months pregnant, it was time to tell my father. He was an elder in our church and a highly respected businessman in our community. Nobody in our church had ever gotten pregnant outside of marriage. Combined with my mother's mental health issues, he was already dealing with a lot. But instead of him getting mad, tears streamed down his cheeks as he hugged me. He said, "I knew you were pregnant because I could see your growing belly. I kept thinking maybe if I didn't say the words out loud, it wouldn't be true. My father talked to a lawyer about a private adoption, so I added another secret to our family. My mother never noticed I was pregnant. Mac and I had a plan now. Soon we could put this behind us and move on with our lives. God, of course, had another plan, and it was far better than Mac or I or my dad could imagine. 1.5 years later, Mac and I married. Life was great the first few years until we decided to have another baby. I told Mac I was quitting the partying. He said, "Go ahead, but I'm not." And that's when the conflict began. The more I tried to keep peace in our house, the more Mac changed. There were times he often acted truly insane. I wondered and worried, could Mac have mental health issues like my mom? During this time, God gave us 2 beautiful daughters, Cherry and Callie. I put on a smile in public and stayed busy and kept our daughters occupied. Meanwhile, our family was falling apart. I tried to keep the rest of the world's eyes from seeing how broken we had become. I had another secret to keep. However, God knew. God knew everything. My sorrows clung around me while I put on a good face and smiled and acted the part of the good wife and the happy mother. Psalms 56:8 says, "You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each tear in your book." I couldn't do enough and control enough and say enough. I was powerless. Nothing was in my control. There was no sign of life coming through to rescue me out of this watery hole. No semblance of Mac ever getting over what was happening to him. It was Sunday morning, February 22nd, 1988. I was busy getting the girls ready for church while Mac was asleep. I'd given up on trying to get him to go to church. I didn't expect our lives to suddenly change, but God had other plans. So did our 4-year-old Callie. Callie stood beside our bed watching her father sleeping. This wasn't unusual, but as I noticed Callie staring at her dad, I saw a different look on her face. It was frustration. "How come Daddy doesn't do anything with us anymore? How come he doesn't go to church with us?" Callie asked. I said, "Daddy's been working really hard. Just leave him alone and let him sleep." Callie stood her ground, stubborn and defiant, just like her father. She said, "If he ain't going to church, I ain't going either." That sassy little thing, hands on her hips, her 4-year-old determined self, wouldn't leave the bedroom. I had to order her out and get us to church. That morning the sermon was on confession, and I put on a happy face and acted like everything was perfect in my life. Yet I couldn't hold back the tears when we sang the last song of the day, "It Is Well With My Soul." I thought of the man I'd left in our bed, a man I no longer knew, a shadow of the man I married. It wasn't well with his soul, and because of that, it wasn't well with mine either, and it wasn't well with our daughters. Back home, God was finally waking Mac up and breaking down his stubborn, strong-willed spirit. Mac surrendered his life to God on that February morning in 1988, and he has never turned back. 1988 became a watershed year for us. We began to deal with some of our family secrets, like the secret of Mac's addiction, which was suddenly out in the open. Like the secret of our baby we placed in adoption, who we now knew was blessed with a good Christian home. And the secret of my mother's mental health issues. As I've mentioned, years after having battled with an unknown illness, they diagnosed my mother as a paranoid schizophrenic. Before finding any sort of known treatment, doctors prescribed all kinds of drugs just to calm her system down. My whole youth, I remember my mother taking prescriptions that filled a shoebox. The drugs never really helped. It was as if she had these demons in her mind that told her people were going to hurt us. That's what she worried about the most, that somebody was out to get us. Her mental state would spiral down to a point where she couldn't function. She was in the hospital as often as every 3 months, and sometimes she would be in for 6 weeks or more. I never worried about her being in the hospital because Dad never said anything worrisome about it. He would just say Mom was sick, and somehow he kept our home feeling normal. My brother, sister, and I knew, for example, that our mother loved to stand in the corner and pray and read the Bible for days. Her Bible was double-sized packed with Bible verses handwritten on paper. I thought all moms did this until I became a teen, and then all of a sudden at other people's houses, I noticed something odd. Wow, Their moms don't stand in the corner praying and reading the Bible all day. That's when I knew something was different about Mom. At age 14, my sweet, carefree childhood went out the window hearing my mother scream. I ran to my parents' bedroom to see my father and one of his friends on either side of her trying to pick her up. She refused to move because she knew they were planning to take her to the hospital. Back then, the treatment for mental illness was to receive shock treatments. The shock treatments literally were like mind erasers. My dad told me years later he once saw her tongue with bloody teeth imprints where she almost bit it off because of what they were doing to her. It was torture and she refused to go back. This was before research and expertise were used in this kind of therapy. That day, as my mother was fighting to stay home, I saw tears in my father's eyes. He didn't want to take her to the hospital, but the doctors told him it was the only way she would get better. Yet always the treatment would wear off after a few months. When Mom was in the hospital because of the state she was in, they often had to tie her down to the bed. One time, somehow she had gotten loose and locked the door to her room, and nobody could get inside. Dad screamed, "Open the door, Jean," but she wouldn't. He found a bobby pin on the hallway floor right there by the doorknob and ended up wiggling it around, and it opened. Dad saw that my mother had climbed out the several stories up window. Mom was hanging onto the open window, ready to jump. He rushed over and grabbed her hands, pulling her back in through the opening. Dad thought he had lost her that time. Such events weren't some freak accident or momentary lapse of reason. This was an everyday ordeal for my mother and father. This was their lives. Due to the heightened state of her condition and the danger she constantly put herself in, a doctor suggested to my father that she have a lobotomy. The doctor told him they were doing these on patients and some would improve. This procedure was where they took a part of the brain out. Back then, they didn't know all the effects of that operation. Later, we learned many times people who had lobotomies were never the same and turned into vegetables. But at this time, my father didn't know this and only wanted to help my mother. So he told them to go ahead with the procedure. The night before the scheduled surgery that was going to take place 2 hours away in Jackson, Mississippi, my father woke up suddenly and felt he heard God speak to him. "Do not do that," he heard. "Do not take her to get that surgery." So the next morning, he canceled the appointment. We continued to keep my mother's mental health issues a secret. We didn't want people calling her crazy, which was society's label. So we kept this private, and my father took the brunt of the weight of my mother's mental illness. In 1988, I heard about something that might wake up my mother from a lifetime of mental torture. While watching 2020 on TV, I heard about a new drug they called the Lazarus pill that would literally wake people up from the dead. It was called Clozaril. Today it's called clozapine. The amazing thing was that people who had schizophrenia were coming back to life while using it. After some research, the doctor told my dad, "Your wife is going to be the first person in Louisiana to try it." Since my mother despised going to the hospitals, they decided to give it to her at home. The first thing that had to happen was getting her off her current medication. So after being on all kinds of drugs, she ended up getting off all of them, going cold turkey. And it was brutal. For several days, all my mother did was crouch in the corner of the bathroom in her nightgown. I stayed there with my father to help him through the process. Mom wouldn't eat, and we could barely get her to drink even a little water. She was catatonic the whole time. After a few rough days, we gave her this tiny little pill before going to bed. The next morning, she was totally dressed, smiling, and asking what we wanted for breakfast, as if the last few days and the last few decades had never happened. It was like Lazarus waking from the dead. Now, fast forward a few years, our son is turning 19 years old, and his adoptive parents contact us. Getting off the phone, Max shouts, "We're going to meet our son Heath for the first time." God answers another prayer. A thought suddenly popped into my head. We have to tell Mom. Remember, she knew never knew I was pregnant. Mac and I sat down at the kitchen table with my parents. We were so nervous, wondering what she would do or say. Dad said, "Jean, we have something to tell you." My mom looked at us with excited eyes. Are Mac and Mary going to have a baby? We all smiled. Well, it's kind of like that, Dad said with a grin. Mac and Mary do have another baby. Mom looked confused. My dad said, 19 years ago, before they married, Mac and Mary had a baby boy. He was adopted by a Christian couple who couldn't have children, and now we all are going to meet him next week. His name is Heath Arthur. Mom laughed and said, Oh, honey, I'm so excited, but how did I not know about Mary having a baby back then? Dad explained to her, that was before you were on this new medicine and you weren't aware of things as you are now. She just shook her head in amazement and kept laughing and smiling, so excited to hear about Heath. Mac and I left my parents' house in shock and thanksgiving at how good God is, as we were working our recovery process, making amends and righting wrongs we'd done in our lives. While building a relationship with Heath, my brother Johnny was at Saddleback Church and came back with a gift for us. He said, there's a really cool recovery ministry at Saddleback. You should check it out. Johnny said, I bought you one of their starter kits. Mac's first thought, well, we're doing recovery already and we're doing a pretty good job of it. We had been leading a recovery ministry in West Monroe, Louisiana for 14 years. Those years helped us get our feet on the ground as we shared the hope we had with others. The timing was right, but standing in the way was Mac Owen's pride. He learned early in his recovery about this type of thinking. It's called contempt prior to investigation. In other words, if you think you know everything, you'll never learn anything. So after leaving the starter kit on a shelf for a year, he finally admitted that his pride was getting in the way. So we flew to Southern California to check out this thing called Celebrate Recovery in August 2004. We started CR on New Year's Eve 2004. My parents loved Celebrate Recovery, and they came every Friday night until they both went to heaven. Someone asked my dad why he went to Celebrate Recovery, and he said, you're never too old to not have things to work on. Mac and I were with my dad the night he died. He developed chronic bronchitis and struggled with it for 20 years. Dad hadn't said a word or even made a single expression or movement since noon. It was almost midnight now. I thought this may be the last time I speak to him. I remember it like it was yesterday when I was a teen and knelt by his side to tell him my news of having a baby. All this time and all these years and all those answered prayers, yet life still stung. Life still hurt, especially seeing my dad struggle to stay alive. I whispered, I love you, Daddy. You've done everything to prepare us for heaven, so it's okay if you go. As soon as I said those words, his eyebrows went up. He heard me. He knew we loved him and that it was okay to go. 3:00 a.m., he simply stopped breathing and woke up seeing Jesus. My father's last words to Mac and me, I'll see you in the new heaven and the new earth. My dad was worried how my mother would do after he was gone. He took care of her for the first 30 years of their marriage, and then when the tables turned, she was his nurse Nightingale, taking care of him for his last 20 years. When he died, God filled my mother's heart with peace, knowing my father suffered no more. She continued to visit nursing homes, taking homemade cakes and cookies to the shut-ins while reading the Bible to them. She gave others hope for 7 more years until pneumonia took her life. My story shows how Satan tries his best to tear every good thing apart, but God wins. Things weren't perfect and never would be until heaven, but through the darkness burst forth light and hope. The question isn't whether bad things will come your way, nor is it when will they arrive. The question is, what am I going to do when the bad times show up? Growing up, I learned to be a people pleaser and a peacemaker. I wanted everybody to like me. When Mac and I married, I took it up a notch and wore myself out keeping secrets, trying to uphold the perfect little family look. I had no boundaries. I thought if I did enough good and didn't displease anyone, then I was a good Christian. I was exhausted from the turmoil going on in my life, but I sure wasn't going to tell anyone. All along, I thought it was my job to make sure Mac stayed straight, not realizing he needed to make his own choices and suffer the consequences. That was confusing to me at times because I thought being a Christian meant saving others from themselves. I didn't realize I had control issues. Mac and I have been through many fun adventures, 44 years together. I thought our adventures were going to slow down and we would live a nice, calm little family life when Mac gave his life to Jesus. But God had a much bigger plan. We saw him weaving together this plan of helping others find the hope we found. John and Cheryl Baker, the founders of Celebrate Recovery, were healing in their recovery at the same time we were. God was working in both of our families' lives for the next 16 years before he would bring our paths together. He had planted a seed in all of our hearts of helping others find healing through recovery. And now we've been leaders in Celebrate Recovery for 17 more years. God has been growing us one step at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time. At times, I didn't know whether God would ever answer those prayers of mine. I've learned sometimes he says yes, sometimes no, sometimes later, and sometimes greater. I just had to give all my concerns to him and trust him. Today, more than ever, we all need community and connection. Celebrate Recovery aims to help break the stigma that surrounds mental health in our Celebrate Recoveries, our churches, and our communities. We continue to work to make sure that our CRs are a safe place to talk about mental health. You are not defined by your diagnosis. You are defined by God who created you. If you have a broken heart or if you have a dark cloud over your head, know this: God knows. He sees you, and God has a good plan for you. Psalms 34:18 says this: "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This is a promise. God will not waste your hurts if you will just let him. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing, Mary. What a powerful story that was. When I hear a story like that and a personal testimony about personal, family, life challenges that people go through, when I hear that story, I wonder if I would be able to endure what Mary endured. With such a beautiful smile and such a positive attitude, a message of hope was brought to us. And one of the things that she mentioned in there is something that we say all the time in Celebrate Recovery. God will never waste a hurt if we are only willing to allow him to use our hurt. We all have hurts, we all have habits, and we all have hang-ups that are preventing us from progressing in our growth, in our recovery, in our faith journeys. So I would challenge you, and I hope that you'll challenge me back as well. Let's stop looking at those shortcomings, those challenges we've been through, the pain that we've endured as negative. And let's look for ways that we can use them and that we can be used by our higher power to bring good news to others, to be a voice of hope and encouragement. We all have a story to tell. I would encourage you to consider telling yours. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Go with God. Go in peace and be a changed, encouraged, and hopeful, faithful family.